I'm Zaina Slayman. I'm actually kind of been low-key part of this group for a while, so I get the emails, but most of my informations come from Lisa Rockman. And I'm the manager of special projects and initiatives at Norquest College, where I develop and manage a lot of sort of just special projects. And people often ask me, like, what's so special? Is that they're kind of, sometimes they're research, sometimes they're sort of innovative design of like new technology or like new programming. And they're unique in that they're not your typical post-secondary type programs. And I work primarily with newcomers and our newcomer learners. And so this project sort of came from a lot of questions around the pandemic and the use of different service delivery modalities. We work with newcomers from the CLB 1 to the CLB 8 level, from literacy and on top of that. And when the pandemic started, everybody sort of shifted online. And then, now that we're kind of moving back into in-person learning, we've developed all these new tools. And now these, literacy learners and these students at the CLB 2 and 3 level are kind of being thrown back into in-person. And we wanted to understand how to best use the tools and the modalities that we developed over the pandemic and how it affects different types of newcomers. So I'll go through a little bit of that background research, and then I'll cover some, and we'll spend some time going through some of the assessment tools and a lot of the resources we developed, and open questions throughout the session. So, and this project was funded by IRCC as one of those SDI projects, and it is wrapping up, but other resources are all available online and they're free. So the project, when we started it out, we spent some significant time doing a massive literature review as well as a community consultation, because we needed to know what the research said about how different modalities impact different types of students. And not just with newcomers, we looked at adult learners, we looked at students with disabilities. And one thing I want to say is that there's quite a lot of research around the impact of these modalities on learners within post-secondary environments, but there's very limited knowledge when it comes to adult learners and when it comes to adult language learners, and then also with newcomers. So, so this research collected anything of that, but I think our project also somewhat is hopefully serving to that need. And so from that research, we know that most newcomers use mobile phones and social media to connect with loved ones. But even with those who are familiar with smartphones, had limited digital literacy and the use of computers for internet and educational purposes. Newcomers of the CLB 3 and below needed more support with technology, unsurprisingly, whereas those with the CLB 3 and higher CLB 7 and higher needed less. When it comes to settlement practitioners, we know that, and again, I'm thinking this is probably sort of like just confirming from those of you who work in the industry, that settlement workers felt unprepared for online service delivery. And, oops, sorry, I'm trying to move the pictures. And only 40% of Canadian settlement agencies had a digital strategy to address the needs of clients when the pandemic hit. On the other side, online learning improved newcomers' language skills and their digital literacy, even for those who were reluctant to try it or who really struggled with it at the beginning. But it also reduced the learner's social capital and hindered successful learnings of individuals with low literacy. So with that knowledge, and I want to say we also conducted a community consultation with settlement workers across Alberta and across Canada to get an understanding of how they felt with regards to their digital literacy and how they were supporting the learners and what types of resources they needed and felt like would be valuable for their clients. And so with that knowledge, we developed a series of tools, and the goal was to provide newcomers with access to resources and the knowledge to make informed decisions on the modality that they should choose. The objective here is really to put the power back into the newcomers' hands when it comes to how they should learn, how they should access services, and not have somebody essentially telling them like, oh, you're at the CLB 3 level, you should be in person, if an online version might be better suited for them. And then we also wanted to equip settlement practitioners with adequate knowledge and the skills in digital technology. So even though a lot of settlement workers, and by settlement workers, just to clarify, we also include link instructors into that. So when I'm saying settlement workers here, I'm also referring to link instructors. A lot of them would say things like, I'm good with my digital literacy. I don't need more training. But then we would ask questions around, well, do you know about this tool or this technology that might be a good fit for your clients? The answer often came back as no. And that's where we sort of learned that, you don't know what you don't know. And once we developed these tools for settlement workers and it was piloted, we got a lot of really positive feedback on the value of it. And so that says something. And so just to kind of roadmap of the project, we're towards the end where I'm doing a lot of these presentations on different events and with different institutions and organizations, and the materials are going to be available and publicly accessible on our website. So I want to go through the assessment tool. I'll cover it and then I'll share a link and you can all just go in and access it directly if you want to sample it, and I'll give everybody a few minutes to do that. So the first tool is a newcomer and settlement practitioner tool. This one is an assessment where they're going through a series of questions, and this one is designed to be accessible for newcomers to take it with a settlement worker. So let's say you work at an agency and you get a client and their CLB is a little bit lower. They don't really know how to navigate websites. This is meant for the worker to go through it with them and then give them guidance on what to do with the results. The second version is very similar to that one, but it's meant to be taken on their own. So let's say a newcomer arrives, they see a link to this page, they're not sure if they should be studying link online or in person. They can go through the assessment themselves. And this one is available in 8 languages, including Arabic, French, Somali, Tigrinya, Mandarin, Spanish, and it's just being developed in Ukrainian, so that'll be available soon. And then the third tool is a digital literacy for settlement practitioners. I'll go through those 2 first ones first, and then we can cover the one for settlement practitioners. So this is what the opening screen looks like for the self-assessment tool. There's a short video that just kind of gives the newcomer an introduction to what this assessment is for, how to use it, and it helps direct them to the service modality that best suits them. One thing I want to note is that this tool is completely anonymous and confidential. It doesn't collect any information like names, dates of birth, address, or anything like that. And the data is not stored anywhere. And so if right now it's accessible through the Norquest website, and if a client goes to it, at the end, they get a results page and they could choose to print their results. But I don't get the data, nobody gets the data. And so it is completely confidential in that way. The other thing too, I want to say is that these assessment tools, all of them are available through SCORM packages. So if you wanted to embed these into your own LMS at your own institution and collect that kind of data and do tracking, you're welcome to do so. So there is that option for those who actually want to use it and collect different longitudinal data with their clients.
Zaina, there's a quick question from me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you're going to answer this coming up, but what is this tool built using?
So it was, so it was built using a combination of Beyond and Articulate 360.
So Articulate 360 is for building
courses,
webinars, right, or something?
It can also be used for building assessments. And I didn't know this at the beginning, but we had a couple of instructional designers actually build the back end of it, where we had a point system that that uses the results from the questions to deliver a certain final findings.
Okay, so did you choose this because it already integrates with your system, or?
No, we did a bit of an assessment. So we had a couple of developers and we had our instructional designer go through different resources out there. And this is the one that we landed on for a variety of reasons. The visual accessibility of it was nice. We could also embed different things like Beyond into it. Beyond is the video development software. And so yeah, that's the reason why we chose it. And then also because it can be embedded into an LMS, which it's not right now at Norquest, but it can be.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Is there any other questions? And also, just to note, if anybody here also has sort of thoughts on like another tool that they've used, one of the things I do in my projects is actually develop a lot of different types of assessments. And it always comes back to articulate for a variety of reasons. And maybe it's because our staff is just familiar with it. But Miyuki, if you've used a different tool, I would love to hear it. And if anybody else here has used a different tool, I would also just really like to hear about it and how it went. And so yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, like so I'm a UX designer. I'm not a developer
great.
per se, but I do work with developers. My projects aren't really around LMSs. Like we tend to build, I'm more used to working with content management systems. So I wouldn't have useful recommendations for you, but I was just wondering what the underlying technology was. So, but
yeah,
just letting you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I have another project, and I'm putting out a posting for a UX designer because it's a new tool that's never been developed, and we want to make sure that when we create the client profiles and we have somebody actually going through the assessment and working with them and identifying the gaps and the issues of the system. And I also wanted to explore an alternative ways of doing. The other assessment is very different, and so it's not like this. But all that to say that I think there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in the UX design world.
Yes. Okay, sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, no worries.
Please continue.
Yeah, no, I'm happy for this like conversational approach to the session. So all good. Okay, back to. So the newcomer assessment tool is divided into two sections. The first one is about you, and it covers things like personal and family situation, educational level, CLB, interest in online learning. The next section is divided into sort of about technology to gather some of their knowledge around digital tools and access to technology. This is just an example of what the questions look like. There's an audio button for those who are visually impaired. So, and that's at the bottom. This is what the results look like, and it's divided into 4 dimensions, including skill, experience, interest, and access. And we did it this way for a variety of reasons. One, because if a newcomer comes in and they're working with a settlement worker and they see that, you know, that they are well equipped for online learning, and in fact, they have high interest for it, they have access, they have some experience, but their skill is a bit low, then the settlement worker can work with them to identify how to increase in that skill so that they can be better equipped for it. So it also the breakdown gives them the opportunity to understand where the gap is for them to actually be able to grow in that if that's what they choose. Similarly, if they're high in all 3, but their access is really low, then that tells the settlement worker, okay, this client needs some support in these areas. And so so that's partially why it's designed this way. And also, again, based on the research that we were doing, the impact of different service delivery modality different based on these 4 different categories. Let me just put a link in the chat. If you click on the link, I just put it on, you're welcome to experiment with it and just test it out. I can take like 5 minutes and just to allow you to kind of get a sense of what it looks like and how it feels. It might ask you for a code at the beginning, but you can just skip that. That's just being up. That was just for the piloting. So I'll give everybody about 5 minutes to just play around with that.
Okay, welcome to the 5 minutes that Zaina is referring to. I'm going to give you an actual overview of what the assessment looks like. As you can see, for the self-directed, it's available in a number of different languages. The English isn't working right now, so I'm actually going to use the version for settlement workers working with clients. I'm going to click on that, and we'll go through that together. So once the person walks across the screen, a little video will jump up. And we'll hit play. Now, as we're watching this video, a couple things. You can include closed captioning, which will appear at the bottom here, and you can speed up the video if you want.
Welcome to
So for example, I'll go a little quicker.
This tool is designed to help you direct newcomer clients to a specific approach or modality in service delivery. Your client may choose to access services in these 3 ways. Online, where the client can receive services at home using their computer. In person, where the client can receive services at a school or other organization. Or hybrid, where the client can receive services in a mix of both online and in-person modalities. It is important to note that this assessment is confidential. Your client's responses to the questions cannot be seen by anyone other than you and your client. The tool was developed based on research that helped us understand how different service delivery modalities work best for different types of students based on their needs, goals, and circumstances. When using this tool, you will guide your client through a series of questions. In total, the assessment will take about 10 to 15 minutes. The number and type of questions can vary from one client to another. Some questions may appear based on how a client answers a previous one. This means that each client will have a different experience when completing the assessment based on how they answer the questions. For example, if a client answers that they do not have any children, they will not see other questions relating to children. You will see one question at a time. You can hear the questions read aloud by clicking on the speaker icon. Based on your client's needs, you can decide how to best complete the assessment with them. For example, for some clients, it may be helpful if you read the questions aloud to them or explain unfamiliar terms. You or your client can respond to each question by clicking on the radio button. Here is an example. After you click on an answer, click the next button to see the next question. Remember that the responses to the questions cannot be seen by anyone else. It is important to communicate this to your client throughout the assessment. After all the questions are answered, you will see a result with a recommendation. It is important to note that this is only a recommendation, not a definitive decision. The choice of service modality is ultimately up to the client. This is just to help them make an informed decision. At the end of the assessment, you'll be guided to a learning plan that may also help your client make the most informed decision. The assessment and learning plan are an opportunity to help clients become aware of what supports they need in place before accessing a specific type of service modality.
All right, so let's get into it. So here's that instruction again. If you want to listen, you can.
How old are you? 18 to 39.
So I'm going to go through the questions fairly quickly and just make a number of different choices, whether I am it's about me or not, just to see what we end up with at the end. And of course, I'm going through it quickly, but you can always pause as you're going through it to see what some of these questions are. All right, and then you come to the end, and it recommends a hybrid services. So when we click on here, it gives us more information. And this is what's quite useful, actually, based on how I've answered the questions or your client has answered the questions. It gives you a sense of whether this person is going to defer with their skill, experience, interest, and access towards in-person, hybrid, or purely online. And like they said earlier in the video, and Zaina mentions in her presentation, ultimately it's up to the client. So this is a useful discussion guide. It's useful as a self-assessment. They would get a similar looking, the questions I believe are the same for a client going through it on their own versus going through it with you as a practitioner. And so you can use this as a conversational starting point to say, does this make sense? Do you want to, access some services in person and some online, for example? And then you can also actually print this to PDF and share it with the person, for example. And then it provides additional information, let's see, on their website. So, learning plans, let's see, I already took the newcomer assessment. Here's a learning plan. So let's see what the learning plan looks like for English. You've completed the service assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a number of different suggestions and information. And again, if you're with your client, you could download this or print it out and save it for them and give it to them directly. So that's an overview of the client assessment tool.
So you have the link. So if you wanted to kind of test it out a little bit more after this session, you're welcome to do that. And I'll just move on just in interest of time. So the next, and also just again, the difference between the one that you took and the one that's for newcomers and settlement practitioners is the intro video is directed at the settlement workers as opposed to the newcomers themselves. And it's not made available in all those different languages. So the other tool that we developed is the digital literacy for settlement practitioners, which I think is very cool. This one measures their competencies in different areas and helps them identify appropriate training and upskilling for their own digital literacy needs to best support their clients. The one thing I will say about this as well, we've had questions about whether or not this tool can be used for people outside the settlement industry, and I think it definitely can. Like any type of client serving work could benefit from this, but it's just good to keep in mind that when we developed it and the language around it, it was very much targeted to individuals who work with newcomers, including Link ESL instructors and people who work in the settlement industry. So just like the other one, it starts off with a little video, and then there are 5 categories for assessments. So there's information and data literacy, there's collaboration through digital technologies, there's problem solving, there's safety and digital content creation. And this was developed based on a framework that was already existent called the Common Digital Competency Framework for Teachers. And I think it was developed through the Netherlands in 2017. And so we use those competencies to create these assessments. And they can be taken separately or just all of them all at once. So it's got 2 sort of sections. First is self-reported type questions. Do you know how to use this? Are you familiar with the use of this, etc.? And then demonstrative questions. So if a person responds, oh yes, I'm very familiar with this, then it goes into demonstrative questions to assess how well they actually know that thing. And then this is what the results look like. The grades are a little bit reverse. So you'd be looking for a level C here, which is somebody who knows, who can use the advanced search tools and has an advanced level in that particular skill that they were testing. Level A is sort of like you have a lot of work to do, or in level B is, you're familiar with it, but you could do a little bit of work and increasing in that knowledge. We've also developed, and this is going to be made available. It's available. It's just our web designer is sort of updating the entire website, but we've developed an open access resource, which is almost like a textbook, but it's a free online textbook. And it includes a list of places to go to for developing those skills. And so a person takes this test and it's kind of like, okay, so what I'm at an A level, how do I increase it? They can go to this guidebook and it lists a variety of resources, and most of which are free or easily accessible online and different softwares that they can use for different types of service delivery. And so that's really cool. And like I said, that one will be uploaded onto our webpage, hopefully today. And so
awesome. Miyuki's got her hand up again.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's me again. Oh.
Yeah.
No, not you again. This is great. Questions are awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a quick one. Just the levels here. Is this also coming from that Commodore Digital Competence Framework?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
And also, I'll have you test it out as well. So this is a QR code, but I'm also going to post a link in the chat as well.
Oh, sorry, Bashir's got her hand up.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question regarding the hypothesis. So from your explanation, is your hypothesis about the language? So the higher the language, the more digital literacy skills, or no?
No. So I'm assuming you're referring to the newcomer tool, right?
Yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention the.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So that was one of so when we did the research, there was a lot of conditions which meant that somebody would be better equipped for online learning or in-person learning. So the language is one of them. Like I mentioned in the lit review, we know that those who are at the CLB 7 and above have easier access with or have greater digital literacy, and vice versa for those of the CLB 3 and below. For a lot in between, it comes down to a variety of things, like their family circumstances, for example, women with children, men with children, with young children at home, or taking care of an elderly, whether they have access to transportation to get to school and what that transportation looks like. There's also a question around social capital. So one of the questions we ask in the assessment is, do you feel like you have a community? I forget the exact language of the question, but whether or not they have access to a community, friend groups, because we also know that research shows that, individuals who attend school or training in person have a greater social capital. So they have a greater connection to their community, they meet more people. And so all of those things are taken into account when we develop the back-end point system. And that's sort of where a lot of those questions came from. Everything that we collected were things that we know play into whether or not an online or an in-person or hybrid model would be a better fit for those people. So language is one of the indicators, but there was a lot of other indicators. Same thing with disabilities. If somebody has a disability that makes it difficult to get around, then that's another question. And the other thing I want to say is that like I mentioned at the beginning, that a lot of this research was based on work within the post-secondary system in both the US and Canada, very little on adult language learners. And one of the interesting things I think will come out of this is, and we don't have funding to keep this or to do a longitudinal study, but to actually assess whether or not, and there's another institution who also got an SDR that is doing that longitudinal study that will look at, okay, so we recommended in-person learning for you based on X, Y, and Z, being able to validate whether or not and work with that client 6 months, 12 months down the road to get a sense of whether or not this was actually the better modality for them, specifically when it comes to adult language learners and newcomers. One of the things that we did, and we had the code at the beginning, was that we can actually pair the results. So we wanted to understand as well, like whether people who are elderly were getting more recommendations for in-person learning, or people with children were getting more recommendations for online learning. And so we have that data that is being analyzed right now. And once it's ready, it'll be embedded into the final report. But I guess my point is, this was based on a lot of research that was still quite limited, and language does have a significant part to play in it, but it wasn't the only indicator.
Zina, because we have similar project, we have Jusur SDI project, and according to we're still finalizing the analysis and data, but in the project we addressed 4 barriers: socioeconomic barriers, language barriers, geographic barriers, and of course digital skills barriers. So but as you mentioned, language was one of the most important barriers, but it's not the only barrier. So this is why when you stressed on the language, I thought you are just connecting the digital barriers with the language barrier. But thank you for your clarification. I think it's great.
Yeah, we also know that there are some with lower language that have a high digital literacy in their language. And so, yeah, I would love to hear about the results from that, Bashira. So if we can connect after, but I would love to see that.
Just to add, Zina, of course, just to add, yes, you're right, because according to the research, the 1-year research survey and focus group informant interviews, we finalized a digital training for the woman. So and what was the recommendation, and Marco, one of the design committee members, that in order to make them benefit from to be able to access easily to virtual services, we need to explain to them in English and in Arab, because they are Arabic speaking, in their native language and English, because we want them to be able to access the language and the terms, because the terms in English, you can't have Google in Arabic, for example. So we have trainers in Arabic language and in English language, and we translated the material. They have the material in both languages, and they were happy because they started, we just completed last Saturday, and they were happy because they said it's 2-in-1. We now have the terms, and we also now we can access these terms in our language. So yeah, I think there is lots of intersectionality between your project and our project. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I was also working on another project where we found that one of the main indicators that allowed students at the low CLB, at the CLB 2, 3, to improve in their digital literacy and when they were studying online was actually to have somebody who with a higher CLB but spoke their language. So if you were Arabic speaking, because you can do all these like workshops and online and have an instructor teach you, but they're all in English and there's a barrier there, and having somebody who could speak Arabic and help them navigate it was actually significantly improves their chances of being better. So exactly what you were referring to, and really happy to hear that. So I'll give everyone another 5 minutes just to try out the digital literacy one, because that one takes a little bit longer.
There was a quick in the chat, Miyuki, I haven't gone through that section yet, but she said she's getting Microsoft Word questions wrong. And so it brings up kind of an interesting issue. Is like, well, if I use Google Docs or if I use, LibreOffice or OpenOffice, will I score lower on a digital literacy assessment because I'm not using the tool that's being tested in that moment?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the tools that we tested in this digital literacy assessment were based on the commonly used tools that we heard from settlement workers during the community consultation. So it's kind of how we based where we based that is, so Word is often a very common word processing document that's used in the settlement sector. Similar to a lot of the other tools that are tested, it was based on a model where we collected which types of tools people were using in the industry. But yeah, that's a good point. So if you don't use it and it's irrelevant, and that's also another reason why we broke it out the way that we broke it out, the assessment, because for somebody like 3 of the assessment might be irrelevant to their practice and their industry. And so they can just focus on the one. And again, why I emphasize that this was designed with settlement workers in mind. But yeah, I mean, Miyuki, like, you're a UX designer, so I don't have doubts about your digital literacy. And so that's an important caveat to keep in mind.
It's useful, yeah. I think 90% of people would be using, Office 365, etc. But I know that at Advocacy they're a Google house, I think. So they're using Google Drive and Google Docs and Google Workplace. So it's interesting. Yeah.
I got everything related to software wrong. I'm afraid to look at my score.
Don't let your bosses know, Miyuki.
No. No, this is interesting though. Yeah.
And this was also built into Articulate 360 for anybody who's interested in knowing that it can be used for this purpose.
Hi again. So like the digital literacy assessment for newcomers, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of what the assessment tool looks like for service providers. So like Zaina mentioned, there are 5 different modules. So I'm going to just dive into one so you can get a sense of what that looks like and how you could use it. Once again, I'm just speeding up the audio.
Hi, welcome to the Digital Literacy Self-Assessment for Settlement Practitioners. These tools will help you identify possible gaps in your basic digital literacy skills. As you know, the settlement sector has shifted between remote, in-person, and hybrid services. This shift has meant that settlement practitioners have also had to acquire new and changing digital skills. The self-assessment covers 5 areas of digital skill that are relevant to settlement practitioners' scope of practice. These areas are information and data literacy, communication and collaboration, digital content creation, safety, and problem solving. The focus of this particular tool is Area 1, Information and Data Literacy. There are 3 sections in this assessment: browsing, searching, and filtering data, information, and digital content, evaluating data, information, and digital content, and managing and retrieval of data, information, and digital content. This assessment will take you about 10 to 15 minutes. You will see 1 question at a time. You can listen to the question by clicking on the circle icon. Images can be enlarged by clicking on them. Please respond to each question by clicking on the circle. These assessments are private and are meant for your own information and use in determining your digital literacy needs. At the end of each assessment, a level is indicated, A, B, or C. You can use this information to follow through the training module provided at the end of the assessment.
All right, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, not the 10 to 15 minutes, but just to give you a sense of what it's going to look like and what kinds of questions it asks. Loading. All right, so you get your results like Zaina has showed us, and you can print that out to make a copy of it. You can have this conversation with your colleagues, for example, and that is, I believe, the end of that assessment. It's a starting point, right? I think that's what sort of people are really looking for, is how do I just get a sense of my own self-assessment and where I think I'm at, because it goes back to some of what you said earlier, Zaina, with is people don't know what they don't know, and they make assumptions about their digital literacy without really having tested it until all of a sudden they're faced with something they hadn't seen before.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I'll just keep moving on. Again, you have the link. You're welcome to experiment and see your score for all the different categories. And I'm happy to, I think you probably all have my email. If not, Mark will feel free to share it. But if you do have any other feedback, would love to hear it. And so
send it to the group, and then we can all see it and read it.
Okay, I will do that.
But yes, of course, you're welcome to email Zaina directly, but encouraging group conversations.
Yeah, I will do that actually. I think we posted it very early when we were looking for during the community consultation. We put out a post on this. So once all of the reports and the tools are all updated and on the website, I'll send out an email, and that way we'll have it.
Awesome. Yeah, Bashir, go ahead.
Yeah, I have other questions regarding the practitioner, Zaina. So you mentioned that as much as the practitioner instructors has digital literacy skills, the better the services that they provide, right?
It depends. Like if they're teaching online, then yes. But I think for some in-person instructors, like that's not really necessary, especially for those who are working with those at the lower CLB where they don't need to train. That it's, I wouldn't say that's necessarily accurate.
Okay, because this is one of the recommendations that we have in our project, and our research team wanted to measure when you have a well-trained instructor versus not trained instructor or settlement counselor. So I thought maybe you can highlight, and how can you measure, how can you measure the results of trained settlement counselor versus untrained settlement counselor?
So training, I've been doing research with newcomers and like language learners within post-secondary for at least 5 years. And so my answer kind of comes from a variety of different projects. But I think when we say training, I think that has to be like more specified. So when we say, because you're right, I think an instructor a lot of the time will make it or break it for our student, especially when it comes to language training. But for example, if an instructor is teaching a CLB 1 level, that's a literacy level, I don't think their digital literacy necessarily is going to have the impact. Their knowledge of how to work with students at that level is going to have a greater impact. And also their ability to be accessible and to support learners, definitely. Of course, in the pandemic, everybody had to become an expert on digital literacy. And a lot of the students who didn't have an instructor who was familiar with this, I think suffered, but also I don't know to what extent that might have been impacted. The other thing too is but yes, I agree. So for learners who are increasing in their knowledge and capacity with digital literacy, so let's say students at a CLB 5 and they're taking a hybrid course, that does make a difference. The instructor's knowledge and capacity with different tools and different ways of creating that learning environment does have an impact on the students, on the student outcomes. I don't have data from this, but I think it might be interesting to do like a pre and post comparative study at some point where you would measure, instructors' digital literacy, and you can use this tool, and then they would land at, a certain level, and then follow their students through a term and get like feedback on their own increase on their own digital literacy and their improvement. So there could be ways of doing it. I think it'd be interesting. This was beyond the scope of this project, so we didn't do it, but I think there could be something interesting there. So the other tool that we developed is a training module. We kind of took all of the results from everything that was used to inform the backend of the assessment tool, and we created a training module. So if you have your new settlement worker, we actually had our settlement studies program students go through this as an educational professional development opportunity. It covers everything that we've kind of used and everything that was collected in the literature review. What are the different circumstances that affect learner and newcomer integration? How can different types of students be supported through different modalities? And we put this in a course. It's online and it's asynchronous, so anybody could take it on their own time, and it takes about an hour to complete. So and that one is also linked on the website. And it also covers, so in addition to all of that knowledge, it also covers the tools that we just mentioned and sort of how to use them and how to best support their clients through it. So this is just a recap. For settlement workers, there's the training module, there's the 5 digital literacy assessment tools, and there's the OER, which is the open access resource. And then for newcomers, we've got the guided assessment that they can take with a practitioner. There's the self-assessment, and then we've also developed a learning plan. So if a client comes in and they get the results of online learning is best suited for you, but they choose they want to be in person anyways, they can go through the learning plan and it breaks down the things that they need to know and to be aware of when they are studying through the different modalities. Let's say you choose online. Here are some things to consider. Here are some things that you should know and prepare yourself for that type of learning. I'm going to go through some preliminary findings from the research. Again, we're sort of in the phase where we're collecting a lot of the data that I think is really interesting. Not that this is not interesting, but we've been piloting this for a little over a year, and this kind of covers some of the initial feedback and responses from the tool. The tool itself was modified and adapted about 3 times throughout the piloting session based on that immediate feedback from newcomers and settlement workers. So our target was 400 linked ESL students and 25 settlement practitioners. This was exceeded. We had interest from, originally it was going to be piloted in Alberta, and we had some interest from we did a piloting session with College Boreal in Ontario, Windsor. And then we also we're doing piloting with the Toronto District School Board in Toronto, which is the largest link provider in the city. And then we also did a rural roots session for rural roots clients. And so I'll just say, I think that's indicative of a need for something like this. And so we had well over 400 participants, and we've gotten over 50 settlement workers pilot the tool. In terms of the actual results, we have about 319 survey respondents. On top of that, we did pilot with a few we piloted with 1 digital literacy class, and then we also piloted at College Boreal with groups at a lower CLB level. And so and for those, we didn't have them go through the survey. We just did a focus group with them at the end. And so, so the 300 surveys are, I think it's a nice representative, I think it's a nice sample, but also noted that we had additional feedback from the focus group sessions with those who couldn't complete the survey. From the responses, we had 40% who were at the CLB 6 level, and then 44 at the CLB 5 and lower, and 16 at the CLB 7 and 8. So there was a nice spread out through that. And about 49% had experience with online learning and 51% had no experience. Again, this was kind of a nice breakup of the results. We tested it out through different devices. 58% of them piloted it through a smartphone, and it is again accessible through different. It's mobile friendly, so it can be taken on the go. These are one of the questions we ask clients after is what their comfort level with technology was when they were doing the assessment. Current analysis is being done to cross-compare this with the results of the assessment. So looking at those who had familiar and comfort with a computer, for example, and trying to understand if like how this related and correlated with the results. And so that data is not available yet, but it's being done right now. This just kind of breaks it down, so I won't get into the details of that. But we see that a lot of the respondents actually felt comfortable with a lot of the different technology tools. This is based, so we asked students whether or not they were likely to write. We wanted to know like their feedback, whether or not clients, newcomers felt like this was, we knew that institutions and organizations thought that this was really helpful. We wanted to understand if the clients themselves thought it was useful. We had 39% say they were extremely likely to take it again, 23% likely. And I think it's also important to note here that the assessment isn't necessarily meant to be taken all the time, and so this is a nice response rate, but also whether or not they would recommend it is another level of this assessment tool is also not designed for every newcomer. I've had this conversation with a lot of settlement workers as well, talking about how, you know, some clients just want to do online. And I think that's also another thing that's important to remember is that this was designed to just give newcomers knowledge of their own digital literacy and help them make the decision. So if a client comes in and they're like, I want to learn online, I'm not interested in person, there's no need to take this assessment. It's really meant for those who are unsure about the modality, and also to support settlement workers when they're providing access to different services to their clients to understand where they stand. With the settlement workers, we had 43 survey responses, and again, there's sort of a nice breakup of like knowledge and experience and years of experience in the industry. One of the things we asked settlement workers what they felt like was the greatest challenge when it came to delivering services online, and they 100% all said that it was client digital literacy. This is, I think, really interesting because I did another research report where we had similar response from settlement workers, but we also asked the same learners what they felt like was the greatest barrier to their digital literacy, to their online learning, and their digital literacy was not identified as one, or their access to technology was not identified as one. So I think it's, and we didn't ask clients in this project that question, but I often, you know, from that research, have often left wondering about the perceived barriers from the link and the settlement workers in comparison to the barriers that newcomers feel like they have. And I think there's something there that I like to think I'd like to explore in the future. But if anybody's done research on this, I would also love to hear it. Again, I think there's a discrepancy between like what we perceive to be the barrier for newcomers when it comes to online learning and what newcomers perceive as their barrier to online learning.
Zaina, I'll just say I haven't done specific research, but I've seen the same conversation and the same discrepancy in the conversations and in the research we've done during the pandemic as well. And I also noticed, I did the online course after the ASA conference, and I noticed in the Padlet, the way settlement workers describe their challenges versus the way they describe their clients. So people talk about their experience was, you know, it's a challenge to learn new computer applications. It's a challenge to learn new skills. It's, you know, it's a challenge to learn. But then they talk about for their clients is lack of digital literacy. So they don't include that language for themselves, right? So I'm learning something versus I lack something. Whereas when they talk about with their clients, they say, well, they lack something. And that's a really interesting kind of mindset I find in the sector.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, you know, I think about like the question earlier about like the digital literacy of the instructors and how that impacts, you know, it'd be really interesting to also like look at like look at that angle, but also from like who's saying that and what their digital literacy level is. And I think there's certainly you know, and I think one thing that we know again from like the research in the pandemic is that a lot of instructors were burnt out, didn't have enough resources, were sort of left scrambling, and I sometimes often wonder how much that played into their perception of you know, like if a student is accessing their course on their phone, for example, because they prefer to use their phone, that can be perceived as frustrating for an instructor, and that can be then determined that like they don't know how to use a computer or they don't have access to a computer. And I think you know, again, I just think there's so much there, because if a student prefers to use their phone and they're fine with it and they're able to develop in their knowledge and their skills, what's the problem? And so we have very defined ways of understanding that development and understanding what, you know, which tools are appropriate and how to use them versus what these students and these clients believe is better for them. And so, yeah, I'd like to think that hopefully we'll see a little bit more research, and maybe I'll get funding to do something that investigates that question a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, Stein's here on the call, and his team is doing some research looking at the use of social media and how newcomers are using it for employment and settlement, and vice versa, how settlement organizations are using it. And I think there's some interesting stuff that's there. Then there's also a pretty good amount of research on newcomer information practice and newcomer use of technology, including, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they've done a couple of surveys now looking at use of technology amongst recently arrived newcomers, pretty broad sample size, I think of 2,000 or 3,000 newcomers, and they don't just do it in English, they don't just do surveys, but they do interviews, they do it in different languages. And so it's a really good sort of juxtaposition from the sector. And I agree, I hear from people as well, it's like, yeah, everything we're doing requires a computer or a laptop, and they only have smartphones, and therefore they suffer from a digital literacy problem, which is the reverse is true. We suffer from a digital inclusion problem if we're not using the tools they're using. So it's been a really interesting conversation in the sector so far.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that these conversations are happening elsewhere too, that we're not the only ones. So definitely. Yeah. Okay. Oops. So based on the research, just kind of wrap it up. There's a few things that we put in the recommendations, and I mentioned this earlier, is that the data that we used to create the assessments was limited, and I think there's some benefit in doing a longitudinal study to look at the impact of different modalities. Again, I think digital technologies and online learning is relatively new in the settlement sector, and doing a longer study looking at the wider impact will be needed to ensure that these tools are accurate. And then I think, you know, as I'm sure all of us have heard many times in the industry, is that additional training and resources and time is needed among settlement practitioners and link instructors to really support them in acquiring the skills they need to support learners. Again, going back to increasing their own digital literacy, right? That's basically it. My email is right there. The website is also on there. And like I said, the website is being updated right now with the new tools, because we made some last adjustments to it based on just lots of feedback that we've received. And the OER, the training module, the literature review I sent it to Marco this morning, but I'm happy to also share it as well. So that we have the literature review is publicly available. So if you want to access it and go through it for your own research, it's there. And it'll also be on the website along with the final report from the project that basically has a shortened version of the lit review, as well as a description of the assessments and how to use them. So if anybody else has any other questions, I'd happy to answer them.
Before Miyuki jumps in, I just want to say thank you. That was awesome and really, really useful. And yeah, if you can send me your slides, I can also send them ahead with the literature review to the group. And I'll also share the recording of this after as well.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This was really nice, and I'm happy to do this, and I love sharing these tools that, again, we developed them with the intention of hopefully they will be widely used, because we spent a lot of money and time on them. And so I'm really happy to meet everybody on this who's here, and it was lovely. Thanks.
Awesome. So Miyuki, go ahead first.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks for that presentation. It's really interesting, all the work you're doing, and especially the conversation you and Marco were having about what the perceived versus the actual. It'd be I would also be interested to see what comes out of that, because it changes how we develop things for like the tools for them, right?
Yeah.
For sure. So yes. So I'm just wondering, these tools that have been developed, are there plans to make the code open source so other organizations can adapt them to their own needs, or?
So that's a great question. No, mostly
No.
because we've never, I've never done it, and we don't, like, the developers, I don't think. I'm gonna look into that. I'll look into it.
Okay.
and get back to you. The advanced thing that we've done is usually develop them, like I said, and develop a SCORM package so that they can be embedded into your system, and you could add tracking data to it. But I'll look into and I'm only saying this because we don't actually have coders, and I don't know if anybody on the team would actually know how to release the raw data. We had the way that we designed it, so we used, like I said, Articulate, and my team, and we were happy we can share like the back end. So like we developed a document where all the questions and the breakdown of like the points and where they would lead to. And then we worked with a instructional designer who's a contractor, and she built the actual tool. It's built the actual assessment based on the data that we gave her. So we don't actually have a data software developer type person who designed it. We worked with a consultant to put it into the system. So I'd have to look into that to see if it would be available to be adjusted. Things like the questions, like once we do the SCORM package, you can adjust certain things around the questions, and you can add questions to it. But the way that the points are set up and broken down, that's where the more complex part would be, that I don't think would be available. You can try it again. It's an Articulate file. So if you have the Articulate file, I don't see why you couldn't adjust it. And like I said, you can add things. It just wouldn't feed into the points. So you can add things like your student ID, your name, any other type of data that you might want to collect, and it'll attach it to that, but it wouldn't impact the way that the results are given out.
Okay. Yeah. So again, I'm more used to working with other systems. So, and also I do know the settlement sector is not used to sharing code in an open kind of manner. So I just thought I'd throw that question because so I'm relatively new to the sector. Marco likes to remind me that I'm not that new anymore, but yeah. So like before I came to the sector, I came from where like most code was totally open kind of thing. So it's just an idea that I just wanted to float and see if I can influence other people to start thinking about it.
I love it. And we are like, again, a lot of the tools and resources that I developed through my projects, they're government funded and like they're open. So like I don't so I don't have any issues with that. I'm just thinking of it logistically, but what I will do is I will connect with our the instructional designer, the consultant who put it into the system, and I'll just ask her if there's a possibility of actually getting the open access code, if that's a thing that we can do with the system that we use. So
yeah, that'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I'll follow up on that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I will just add on that, Miyuki, as well, is that Norquest is actually one of the pioneers around open educational resources, which is the first step towards open sourcing. The idea is that we're gonna create this resource, but we're not just gonna put it on our LMS. We're gonna make it available for you to put on a website or an LMS. And SCORM is like you can embed a SCORM package in the same way you can embed a YouTube video into your own LMS, and even on a website, right, with plugins and things like that. And that's phase one. And our sector isn't even gone that far in many cases, right? Which is like, I'll share this closed PDF kind of thing. And they won't even share that. So it's one step towards the next step, which is more open standards and open source and stuff like that. But the benefit I see, and I've seen this before, like Norquest has created a whole bunch of SCORM packages and curriculum based on digital literacy training and web safety, for example, that anyone can go and literally download from their website and incorporate into their own. So if you're doing a module on cybersecurity, right, you can embed it in your Moodle or your Blackboard or your LearnDash with the SCORM, and then surround it with your own additional context, right? So you can't play with the module, but it's there as the first step, and then after that you can add additional kinds of context to it. In the same way you could embed a YouTube video and add stuff around it, right? So that's sort of step one, which is miles ahead of where a lot of our sector is right now. But I agree with you, is that step two is eventually figuring out how you can break it out for even more reuse within the code itself.
And I've never had that question, and partially again because most of our partner organizations that want to use this want the SCORM package. Like they don't want to play around with the back end of it. They just want to like embed it. And so this has never actually come up, which is why I've never thought about it. And didn't even know it was I'm not tech savvy at all. And so this is an interesting question that I'd like to explore. And again, because I have other projects where we're also developing some of these open access assessment tools, and it'd be interesting to know if this is possible.
Yeah, and it's possible that it's not possible, right? I totally, like I said, I'm not familiar with LMS type technology myself. So, I mean, I'll take a look at that SCORM package too, because that's something I'm totally not familiar with. So, but thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for the question.
It sounded to me like.
Oh wait, hold on, Drew. Oh no, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Basha, your time is coming. Don't worry. Actually, yeah. Is it related to this quick conversation?
Yes, I just wanted to add on real quick.
Go ahead.
It sounded to me like there might be a little bit of like some nuance somewhere between what you were describing, Marco, is what would be step one and what would be step two. You know, that like short of open sourcing, you know, like by OSI definition, something into like some kind of a repository or a site where people download the bits and pieces to put back together themselves. There might be like a prior step to that, which is sharing these packages, but with some, and I don't know how common this is across the sector because I am brand new to the sector, with some sort of implied licensure, right? Like I didn't see anywhere on there any sort of like Creative Commons or anything like that, like explaining to someone else, yes, you can download this and incorporate it into your own thing and use it your own way. And if you do, you should you should include this kind of like developed by attribution kind of stuff. So I don't know if there's like a middle ground there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point because Norquest kind of comes more from the language side of the sector, where this is all much more common, right? So if you go to Tutela, which is the language sector side of the sector community of practice, you'll find SCORM packages and H5P elements that people have created that you can embed and create and add to your own website. So again, like here, instead of a YouTube video, it's a module. And then on that site, for example, it'll give the copyright statement, and most of it is that you can't remix it, but you can use it freely with attribution, for example, right? And the idea there is like, again, if someone got funded like Norquest, in the case of TDSB, they got funded to do a whole series of citizenship and reconciliation modules. So they're all there for any ESL teacher to download and incorporate it into their learning management system without having to recreate it themselves, which is kind of the whole point. But at that point, they can surround it with any additional context and other modules and their own stuff that they want to. But the idea is like, well, for the core kind of content, it's created for everybody, basically, kind of like what Zaina has done here. So you could take that module, slap it into something, and then do what you want with it. So there are these repositories that actually already exist, but on the language side and the settlement side, we're a little bit behind when it comes to these kinds of things. Basha, your turn.
Yeah. Thanks, Zaina, again for the amazing presentation, findings, and recommendation. I have a question. It might be beyond your scope, but you refer to this thing. You mentioned that while students at class, they prefer to use their mobiles to get to be learned, but the instructor, they don't like it sometimes, but they prefer to use their smartphones. And this is what we want. We want what clients prefer tools and platforms. And this is what we stress on our project. For example, we find that there is different type of devices connected with the different types of information that clients they need. Also, there is different platforms connected with different types of information. Just to give you an example, sensitive information, our clients, they don't like online services. They like to have one-on-one, sometimes in person. For labor information, employment, they like to have in person or sometimes one-on-one access to services. So I wonder if you have some findings relating to the type of information the clients needed and the connection with these information with the devices and the platforms they prefer.
So I don't have that information, and I was sort of using it as an example because in another project I worked on, the data for that one is not available because it wasn't approved by ethics and it was more of an internal review, is that we saw from instructors saying that students don't have access to adequate devices. That was like a top response, where students all said they have access to an adequate device. And so like that's where the interesting conversation kind of happening, where we started to speculate of what that meant. Perhaps instructors are referring to maybe certain students use, and so I was using that as an example of like, hypothetically, this could be what's happening, but I have no idea. And I haven't dug into that level. And I think it would be still really interesting, when we talk about like finding out where that disconnect has happened, because ultimately, yeah, same thing, Mashahid, like that's what, and am I saying your name properly?
Yes.
Okay, good. And
the first one pronounced my name probably.
I wasn't sure because everybody's.
It's okay. No, it's difficult name, but it's okay.
Yeah. So I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. All that to say that I think I'm speculating on a lot of this now because this knowledge is still relatively new. And there's very obviously a gap, and we're the same. Like we also like are trying to figure out, like, because I'm also of the opinion of like giving clients what they think they need and not telling them what they think they need. And this is partially part of this project, is that like, well, here's what this assessment tells us. You make the choice. You decide based on this. And so I agree. And I think if clients are saying that they have access to like digital devices, then they have access to digital devices. But there's something else that is creating a barrier that instructors aren't identifying, or that they're misidentifying with something else.
Thank you.
I don't know what it is, but I would love to find out.
Yeah.
And if I do, I'll let you know.
We might have some of the indicators and in our project relating to the different platforms connected with the different type of information these women, because we target specific women, so needs.
Is some of that data available?
And we have a draft, preliminary thoughts, but not yet. But of course, we would like to share it, and our research team will yes, happy to share.
Great. Yeah. I'm a researcher originally. And so the stuff, I get very nerdy about it and just want to like dig into the layers of it. And so it's very exciting. Yeah. That's great that you're doing that work.
I've got some stuff to send you then.
Oh, great.
Because there is actually a ton of really good research, at least 20 years of research that looks at technology use in the sector, including the newcomer side of information practice. And I'll go through the literature review to see if some of that's captured in there, but there's a lot that's been done already that we're building on as a sector, that I think you might find useful if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah, I'd love to see it if you have that, for sure.
Definitely.
Like I said, I will, once the website is fully updated and has everything on it, I will send out an email and just include all of that. And would love to keep this conversation if anybody else has anything else. And like I mentioned, I'm working on a different project that's developing a series of assessments as well. And so all exciting things happening. Oh,
awesome.
great.
Well, thank you again. So I threw in the chat a link to what I call a chronology of tech and innovation research from the last 20 years. Just so you can get a sense of what's sort of out there. And there's more that's been done since I posted that 3 years ago. But yeah, this was a really great presentation. And we usually go till 2:30. I know people are leaving, but is there anyone else that wants to bring up either something they're working on or a question that they might have related to this presentation or the group purpose in general? And if not, I'm happy to let you go early. Stein, go ahead.
Yeah, last question. So the in your tool, you mentioned that it's an assessment for both sides, the newcomers and the practitioner. On the newcomer side, do you also do any assessment for learning after they've taken the the program?
So you mean like the link program?
Yeah.
So we don't do any type of, I mean, they do their language assessment that measures their language development. We've done, so we don't do anything aside from that. I mean, we also do occasional sort of surveys to get their knowledge and experience, and we're collecting some data around their digital literacy and access to tools to get a sense of how things have been evolving since the pandemic. But we don't do this assessment regularly, if that's what you're referring to, or kind of measuring a pre and post program.
Yeah.
And also
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And also some clients who take the assessment might not go into link. They might just go into receiving settlement support or other types of training. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering because it might be that, they might be able to take the online courses, but we aren't sure if they are learning on the online.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when I mentioned that I think a longitudinal study looking at the impact of this would be really interesting, because you could then collect that data. Like you can have a client, because this project was a 2-year project, and the first year was spent developing the tools. And so there isn't that post, but I think it would be really interesting to have clients take the assessment and then follow them through their journey of so let's say they spend a year in link, and if they're online, and looking at their increase in both digital literacy but also language development, and then assessing that against the results from the assessment. So I think that would be really interesting. We didn't collect that just because of scope and timelines, but yeah, so I agree, and I don't have that information.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
So, one question, you mentioned it's a 2-year project. Does that mean it ends at the end of this fiscal year, or
yeah, March 31st?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious what kind of a feedback or reaction you're getting from IRCC, because I mean, this has been funded under the idea that, this is a question that needs to be answered leading up to the next national call for proposals, for example. How do we assess literacy? How do we address it? Digital literacy. So I'm curious what kind of feedback or impact you're having at that level.
Very little, but I think that's the nature of working with a funder, and I think we'll hopefully see a lot more. IRCC has been very supportive of this project and enthusiastic about it. So I think there's also a recognition of that need, and that's part of why the recommendations is there, is that hopefully this will also feed into further projects because yes, this was funded on the service delivery improvements project, which is meant to be experimental to kind of see what's needed. And so I have not heard anything explicit about building off of this. And also, I don't know if anybody else here works with IRCC projects, but you kind of do your reporting, and
everybody does.
There's very little return, and they're swamped managing so many different SDIs and so many different link contracts, and so I have not received very direct feedback on that level. But aside from that, we've gotten very positive support from them and enthusiasm with the project, and Norquest is also one of the largest link providers in Alberta, if not maybe all of Western Canada. So we also have a much larger contract with IRCC where perhaps more of their focus has been.
I think there's it's the next step. I think that almost matters more. Like you're saying, a longitudinal study would be nice, but as a sector, then how do we collectively take the knowledge that you've created? And as you mentioned earlier, there's 2 or 3 other projects that are looking at assessment tools. Bashayers is looking at a tool that will lead to digital literacy. There's the folks at the Y in Ottawa that have created an online an evaluation of hybrid services that includes a client assessment component, not about their digital literacy, but about whether they're interested or able to access hybrid services. And all of these things kind of combine together to create a greater whole. And IRCC doesn't appear to have either an incentive or an interest in creating that whole, but as a sector. So my concern is, we lose you in a couple of weeks from this project and you move on to the next project, which may or may not be related to this one. And so how groups like OCASI or other sector umbrellas can kind of take on a collective approach to let's learn from all of these pieces, which is why I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation and recording it so we can share it out there so people will know more about your project, but also where it might intersect with theirs. And so for those of us who are kind of, following the ebbs and flows of these projects. I think it feels like it's up to us to kind of drive that conversation more than the funders is having.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you very much for this. Any other thoughts or questions, Miyuki? You're off mic. Go ahead.
No, this has been really great. Thank you, Zaina, and everyone's been asking great questions too. So it's been really interesting. Yeah,
I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing this with us. And yeah, I'll share the literature review and your slides when you send them, and the recording with folks. And hopefully there'll be more conversation, even just before you leave us at the end of the month.
Well, I'm still at Norquest. I'm still around, and inevitably there'll still be some things I'll probably keep doing with this project, anyways. But the project itself ends. So things like these types of presentations and conferences. There's no more funding for it.
But we'll still have access to you then, as
I'm around, and I work. Most of my projects deal with supporting newcomers in the settlement sector. So I'm around, doing a few other things.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again for the time, and thanks everyone for joining. And we'll continue the conversation on the discussion group and then next month.
It was lovely meeting all of you.
yeah, lovely.